Today, we're talking about 3 mistakes that beginner filmmakers make and how you can fix them. So let's jump right into number 1, and that's going to be white balance. Now, most photographers are going to struggle with this one. This is because when you take a raw photo, which is the format that most photographers shoot in, you can change the white balance when you get into your editor, whether it's Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever. So what is white balance? Well, every light has a color temperature. And we're not talking about hot and cold, we're talking about color and tint. We measure color temperature in Kelvin rather than Celsius or Fahrenheit. So the sun, for example, is around 5600 Kelvin. Most bulbs in your house can range from 2800 all the way up to 5600. The majority are usually under daylight, which is 5600, and they stay maybe around 2800 to 3600. So basically, the higher the number, the cooler or more blue the light is. The lower the number, the more warm or orange your light is. Now, some people get this backwards, they flip-flop them, and I'll tell you why. What white balance essentially is a feature in your camera to make white look actually white. Old film cameras weren't capable of balancing color temperatures, and that's why sometimes, depending on what kind of lights you were using, you would get a weird color cast of orange or blue. Now, with the power of white balance, you can dial in the color temperature of the lights that you're using, and make your whites and everything else look natural. So picture this, 5600 Kelvin is daylight, 3200 Kelvin is tungsten. The exact middle of that is 4400 Kelvin. The way that I look at it is that's neutral white. So we're shooting in daylight. That means our color temperature is 5600 Kelvin. We're set to 4400 Kelvin, which is technically warmer than 5600 Kelvin. The way that your camera works is it takes this gradient of blue to orange and it just flips them. So basically now when you raise your color temperature in your camera, it's adding more orange. This is to balance out the amount of blue that's in your image. If you didn't know, orange and blue are opposites on the color spectrum. So if you want to take blue away, you would add orange, and if you want to take orange away, you would add blue. So if you're shooting at 4400 Kelvin and your light source is 5600 Kelvin, it's going to look too blue. You need to add more orange into the image to make it look natural. So changing your white balance is going to depend on what camera you use, and every camera is different. Some cameras allow you to dial in the exact number of your Kelvin unit. If your camera can do this, and this is the way that you want to dial in your Kelvin, go online and do some research and learn what lights have what color temperatures, whether it's daylight or tungsten or fluorescence. One of the more universal ways that people dial in their color temperatures is with a photo of a white surface. My cameras, for example, the Sony a7R III and the Sony a6500, can do this. If you have a different camera, just go do a quick Google search and learn how to do this method. So take your camera and open up the setting that allows you to change your color temperature based on a photo. Now you're going to take a photo of something white. Now to get this dialed in exactly, you're going to want to get an 18% gray card, but some of us don't have those, and some of us just don't have the capability of using them for whatever we're shooting. You might be shooting B-roll, you're running and gunning, you don't have time to set up an 18% gray card and take a photo of it for white balance. In that case, just grab something white, whether it's a piece of paper or cloth or something like that, and shoot that. It's going to get you as close as you possibly can, and really, it's going to be such a minor difference, if any at all, that you're not going to be able to notice. Once you take the photo, your camera's going to analyze whether it needs to add orange or blue to get that to be perfectly white. And then you're good to go. Your whites are going to look white, and your skin tones are going to look good, and everything's going to look as it should. I didn't mean to rhyme there, but I feel like it just deserves to be recognized, so thank you. Number 2 is the exposure triangle. You need to learn the exposure triangle if you want to maximize how you use your camera. It's going to give you full flexibility over the way that you expose your images. If you don't know the term, you might recognize shooting manual versus shooting automatic. Now, if you haven't learned to shoot in manual yet, I would highly recommend going and watching my video on the exposure triangle. It's gonna appear in one of these corners up here. I don't know which one. It's gonna swoop in like this or something. I don't know. It's gonna be a white card. Click on it and go watch that video. You're gonna learn a lot about how to use your camera. And if you want to be a professional photographer or even just utilize your camera in the proper way that it's meant to be used, go watch that video. You're gonna have to learn that eventually. The exposure triangle consists of 3 things: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Now, if you're a photographer, you're like, oh cool, I already know the exposure triangle. Well, guess what? You freaking don't. Okay? Not for video. I'm sick and tired. When taking photos, you can practically use whatever shutter speed you want, depending on what you're shooting, of course, but when you're shooting video, it's very specific and you're gonna have to stick to a very specific set of rules. So when shooting video, make sure your shutter speed is double whatever your frame rate is. If you're shooting at 24 frames per second, you wanna use a shutter speed of 1/48th, but most cameras can't do that, so use a shutter speed of 1/50th. Shooting at something like 60 frames per second for slow motion or even just real-time footage, you're gonna wanna use a shutter speed of 1/120th of a second. The reason is because everything has a motion blur in it. When, you know, like this, that's motion blur, where you can see streaky lines going across your image when things are moving. Doubling your frame rate and shutter speed is gonna give you the most natural and realistic looking motion blur to the human eye. If you shoot higher than double your frame rate, it's actually gonna look really choppy and you're gonna get unwanted, kind of like stuttery looking videos. If you shoot lower than double, it's gonna start looking blurry and muddy and like weird and smeared across the screen. It's gonna kind of look like you're in a hazy, like LSD trip. If you're having a hard time getting proper exposure because you're stuck at that shutter speed, you're gonna have to use what's called an ND filter. This is a dark piece of glass that you're gonna put over top of your lens. Some people refer to it as like sunglasses for your lens. It's gonna allow you to expose properly without having to change any of the settings that you might not wanna change. The third, but definitely not the last mistake that beginner filmmakers are gonna make is disregarding their audio. This is by far the biggest and most frequent mistake that new beginner filmmakers make, and it's kind of crazy how many people do it, but it makes total sense. Now, everyone wants 4K, everyone wants slow motion, everyone wants drone shots and gimbals and crispy details and freaking like helicopters flying across the screen and explosions and crazy. And this is understandable because when you watch a video, what do you notice? You don't notice like, oh man, that audio quality is like just on point. You're like, holy my God, is that shot in 8K? That's freaking ridiculous. Nobody notices pristine audio in somebody's video, and that's because great audio is invisible. Look at it like this. If you're thinking about the audio, whether it's good or bad, doesn't matter which one, you're not thinking about the story. You're more focused on something else that really doesn't have anything to do with the story at all. The quality of the audio has nothing to do with the story. The audio itself obviously does, dialogue and music and whatnot, but the sound quality, thinking about it, that's gonna take your attention off the story. That's why great audio quality is invisible. No one thinks about it. No one has to think about it. So many filmmakers want to buy a new camera that shoots in friggin' like 20K. They want to shoot 4K, they want the great images, the great grading, they want to throw all their money at that, but they're forgetting that your video is 50% audio. Invest in your audio quality. You want to make sure that it sounds good and crisp and clear. You don't want your audience thinking, I really wish he didn't sound so muffled right now, or, you know, I wish I could hear what he was saying. No one's gonna be like, well, this video is about how to cook a steak and I can't hear him. I can't hear what he's saying. And you know, that's kind of detrimental because I need to be able to hear what he's telling me, the information about how to cook a steak. But you know what? It's shot in 4K. The grading's amazing. It's really crisp and clear and it's awesome. No one's gonna say that. You gotta make damn sure that your audio is crisp and clear and good. And if you don't, your audience is not gonna forgive you. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a thumbs up. If you didn't, leave a comment down below and tell me why. I would love to hear your opinions and your feedback. It's always appreciated. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this, but that's gonna do it for this one. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Also comment if you like the Seahawks because they're the best.